I wrote the wind speeds and directions in steady ink and watched the pressure fall. My report went up the chain, and the room stayed committed to the schedule. When the engines rose into the dark, the air did not change its mind. Later, the messages came back in fragments, drops wide, men missing, landing lights in the wrong fields. I kept taking readings, and the numbers would not look away. June 5th, 1944. Southern England. Airfields are crowded with transport aircraft. Gliders are lined up in the grass. Paratroopers wait with heavy packs and folded parachutes. Across the channel, German defenses sit behind flooded fields, hedgerows, and gun positions. The operation depends on surprise and timing. It also depends on wind. In the days before the airborne drop into Normandy, weather becomes a military problem as real as fuel or ammunition. Low cloud can hide markers. Rain can erase tracks and slow vehicles. Wind can scatter aircraft formations. Wind can turn a planned landing zone into an unknown field. The Allied meteorological system is large and busy. By 1944, observers watch skies from coastal stations and inland fields. Some work on air bases. Some work in small huts near runways. Some record conditions from ships and stations facing the Atlantic. Their work is routine. It is measured. It is written down line by line. A weather observer's day begins with instruments, not maps. He checks the barometer. He notes pressure changes. He watches the anemometer cups turning. He reads wind direction and wind speed. He compares cloud layers, visibility, and temperature. Yet he writes numbers that appear plain, but decide whether aircraft return. He is not the officer who will brief generals. He is not the one with authority to delay an invasion. He is one link in a chain. The chain carries facts upward, where they become advice. Advice then becomes orders. On June 5th, the observer's readings do not match the desired picture. Pressure trends suggest unsettled air. Cloud bases are not stable. Wind reports show strength at altitude that can increase drift. In plain terms, the air is not calm. It is not obedient. The observer does what he is trained to do. He sends the report. He adds the cautions he is allowed to add. He uses the language of his service. He does not write poetry. He does not write fear. He writes that conditions for night navigation and precise drops will be difficult. He notes that winds aloft may exceed what planners assumed. He writes that changes may arrive quickly. In the meteorological room where reports gather, the observer's lines join many others. Forecasting in 1944 is part science and part judgment. It is built from scattered observations and limited models. Meteorologists compare station reports like puzzle pieces. They argue over fronts and ridges. They estimate timing. They try to put a moving atmosphere into fixed hours. The forecast is bleak in the specific way that matters to airborne forces, not bad weather in a general sense. Bad for tight formations at night, bad for pathfinder accuracy, bad for aircraft that must fly low to avoid detection and still keep station, bad for the precise release points needed to place units near bridges and causeways. Yet the invasion plan has its own weather. It has schedules that cannot stretch forever. It has tides, moonlight, and naval mines. It has thousands of ships already at sea or ready to leave. It has soldiers who have been told, and then untold, and then told again. Delay is not just a decision. Delay is an entire system reversing itself. The observer does not see all that. He sees the pressure falling and the wind strengthening. He sees the wind direction shifting. He knows what those numbers do to parachutes. He has likely watched training drops before. In training, a change of wind can scatter a stick of paratroopers across fields. In training, the scattered men are still in England. They can be collected in trucks. In Normandy, scattered men will be isolated at night among enemy patrols. A few miles matter, and a few miles can change who arrives at a bridge first. Reports move upward. At each step, language becomes shorter. Caution becomes a phrase. A phrase becomes a line in a briefing. In the high-level discussions, weather competes with urgency. The senior planners already know airborne drops carry risk. Airborne doctrine accepts dispersion as a cost. Paratroopers train to regroup from scattered landings. Pathfinders exist because planners expect uncertainty. Pilots rehearse under poor conditions because combat rarely offers ideal skies. That acceptance can become a habit. It can also become a blind spot. If dispersion is expected, then warnings about drift can be treated as something already priced in. If loss is expected, then the forecast can sound like pessimism rather than information. The observer's bleak forecast is dismissed in that institutional way, not with ridicule, not with shouting. Dismissed through priority, through the quiet choice to trust the schedule more than the caution. There is also the human pressure of a plan that has reached its point of no return. Thousands of aircraft have been prepared. Crews have been briefed. Paratroopers have checked harnesses and weapons. Glider troops have loaded equipment that cannot be carried in a jump. The operation is not a single action. It is a chain reaction. If one part stops, many parts must stop. Each stop has consequences. In the afternoon and evening of June 5th, men move through airfields under strict control. They are fed. They are told routes and signals. They are shown aerial photographs and sand table models. And they are warned about flooded fields and hedgerows. They are told to find causeways. They are told to link up. The weather observer watches all this from the edge of his world. His tools remain unchanged. His last report remains on paper and in signals. His authority remains limited to accuracy. As darkness approaches, the wind does not settle. It continues to show strength and variation. At low level, it can be deceptive. Pilots feel one set of conditions near the ground. At altitude, winds can be stronger and different in direction. These differences matter when formations must hold tight and when release points must be exact. Transport pilots fly under strict radio silence or limited communications. They fly through cloud and haze. They fly across a black sea. They attempt to keep station by sight and timing. Yet navigation relies on dead reckoning, beacons, and crew skill. Weather adds error to every calculation. In the hours before midnight, aircraft begin to take off. Runways are busy. Engines roar and then fade into the night. The sky fills with shapes that are hard to count. The observer's role is no longer to warn the invasion. The decision has been made. His role becomes record and confirmation. As aircraft depart, he watches the winds that will meet them. He logs them. He understands, perhaps with a quiet dread that he will not voice, that the atmosphere will not negotiate. Over the channel, conditions vary. Cloud layers shift, visibility changes, winds aloft push and pull at formations. Even small deviations accumulate. A few degrees off course becomes miles by the time the coast appears. As the first aircraft approach Normandy, the reality of wind becomes operational. Aircraft drift off planned corridors. Some formations break. Pilots adjust headings to compensate, sometimes overcompensating in uncertain visibility. Anti-aircraft fire forces changes in altitude and course. Cloud forces aircraft to climb or descend, breaking cohesion further. The wind then acts on parachutes and gliders. Pathfinders are supposed to arrive first and mark drop zones with lights and signals. They are a technical solution to an old problem, but pathfinders themselves are subject to drift and error. If pathfinders land wide, they mark wide. If they cannot reach the intended zone, they mark the zone they find. A weather observer on the ground in England cannot see these details in the moment, but his forecast is becoming visible in the pattern of reports that will return. The drop is beginning in the wrong winds. When paratroopers jump, they enter a column of moving air. They hang beneath canopies that turn each man into a sail. A stronger than expected wind carries them farther. A shifting wind carries them sideways. A low jump under fire leaves less time to correct drift. A higher jump can increase exposure and drift. Men land in hedgerows, orchards, marshes, and flooded fields. Some land in the correct area and begin moving to objectives. Others land far away, confused about their location. Some lose equipment on impact. Some drown in flooded land, where they cannot release gear quickly enough. Some are forced to fight immediately, alone or in small groups. Gliders, which are expected to land in fields, face their own weather. Wind affects approach and touchdown, yet a glider pilot has little power to correct. A gust can shift a landing point into obstacles. Hedgerows, ditches, and poles become lethal at speed. A hard landing breaks equipment and bodies. A landing in the wrong field can separate soldiers from their mission. What was planned as organized arrival becomes a dispersed arrival. Airborne troops are trained for this. They rally at pre-arranged points. They use compasses, maps, and local landmarks. They move by sound and sight. They look for friendly signals and avoid roads. But training cannot remove the cost. Dispersion delays assembling units. It disrupts plans to seize bridges quickly. It makes coordination difficult. It forces improvisation. In some places, improvised groups still achieve key tasks. Small teams cut wires. They seize crossings. They raid gun positions. They create confusion that helps the amphibious landings. Airborne troops on D-Day did perform critical actions, even when scattered. Yet the wrong winds leave a record of preventable strain. More men than expected are lost to water and isolation. More units than expected take longer to form. Some objectives are reached late by fragments rather than formations. Some drops place men too far to influence the first hours as intended. Back in England, the weather observer remains at his station. He receives partial reports through the system. Some are delayed. Some are unclear. Some never arrive. Operations rooms try to assemble a picture from scattered signals. just as meteorologists assemble a forecast from scattered stations. At first, the reports may sound like the normal chaos of airborne warfare. Units dispersed, drop zones uncertain, casualties unknown. These are expected phrases. Then details accumulate. Formations broken earlier than planned. Pathfinders missing some intended zones. Gliders landing wide. Men carried farther than predicted. The pattern is consistent with wind-driven drift, made worse by cloud and enemy fire. The observer knows this pattern because he predicted it in careful language. He also knows that prediction does not equal authority. In large operations, warnings can be correct and still be overridden. The system rewards execution when delays are costly. It also rewards optimism when optimism keeps the plan moving. As dawn arrives on June 6th, the amphibious landings begin. The invasion is underway. On the beaches, weather matters again, in waves and surf and visibility. At sea, ship commanders watch conditions closely. They judge whether landing craft can reach shore. They judge whether naval gunfire can see targets. The airborne drop, though scattered, still influences the battle. In many accounts, the dispersion contributes to German confusion. German units receive reports of paratroopers in unexpected places. They send forces to investigate multiple threats. They hesitate in some areas. They misjudge the scale of the airborne landings. This effect is real, but it is not a planned substitute for accuracy. It is a byproduct of friction. It does not erase the human cost of men isolated at night, or the time lost to regrouping, or the equipment damaged in hard glider landings. The weather observer's work is not glamorous. It rarely appears in heroic narratives. But the observer's logbook and transmitted lines become part of an operational history. They are evidence that the atmosphere was known to be dangerous for precision. In the days after D-Day, the Allied system continues to function at high tempo. Air supply missions and reinforcement drops depend on weather. Glider landings continue in subsequent operations in Normandy. Each mission requires a forecast. Each forecast competes with urgency. The observer returns to routine. He takes readings at set hours. He prepares reports. He watches the sky and the instruments. He may hear the distant sound of aircraft departing again. He may see wounded men and damaged planes returning. He keeps writing numbers. A turning point in this kind of story is not a single dramatic confrontation. It is a quiet realization inside an institution. Weather is not a background condition. It is a participant. The airborne drop demonstrated that, again, at great cost. Some adjustments are made, not always publicly and not always credited to one observer. Meteorological services refine their methods. They prioritize certain measurements for airborne operations. They push for clearer communication about winds aloft and drift risk. They work to standardize how forecasts are presented to commanders. Operational planners also absorb lessons. They improve pathfinder techniques. They adjust aircraft routes and timing. They develop better navigation aids. They consider wider drop zones or alternate plans when winds threaten precision. They do not eliminate risk. They attempt to manage it. Still, institutions resist the lesson that is hardest to accept. Sometimes the correct decision is to delay, even when delay is expensive. Sometimes the cost of proceeding under poor conditions is higher than the cost of waiting. This trade is not simple in war. It is often decided by imperfect information and competing dangers. The observer's forecast was dismissed, and the drop began in the wrong winds. That sentence contains two truths. One is about meteorology, the other is about command. Meteorology in 1944 is improving, but it is not all-seeing. Forecasts are not promises. A bleak forecast can be correct in broad strokes and wrong in detail. Wind speeds can change by hour. Cloud layers can lift or lower unexpectedly. Fronts can stall. Commanders know this and sometimes distrust caution for that reason. Yet observers and forecasters also know something. Commanders do not always feel in their bodies. A plan can be elegant on paper and still be fragile in the air. Airborne operations are especially fragile. They place men in motion with limited control and demand. They arrive at precise points to shape the battle. When a commander hears winds may be strong, it can sound abstract. When a paratrooper feels the canopy pulling him sideways into darkness, it becomes physical. When a glider hits an unexpected obstacle because the approach line shifted, it becomes immediate. Weather moves from chart to consequence. In the immediate aftermath, no system likes to admit it dismissed a warning. Reports focus on courage, improvisation, and success. These are important. They are also safer stories than institutional error. After-action reports do include weather. They note cloud cover. They note visibility. They note winds. They describe dispersion. They recommend changes. But the language tends to be careful. It rarely points to a single decision-maker and says, plainly, this was ignored. The weather observer remains mostly unnamed in popular memory. Many such observers existed. They served in Britain, at sea, and across the theater. They were part of a profession that war made urgent. Their legacy is quiet but persistent. Modern military planning treats meteorology as a specialized discipline. Weather officers are embedded with commands. Winds aloft are measured and modeled in ways that were not available in 1944. These changes came through many experiences, including airborne drops that showed how unforgiving the atmosphere can be. The D-Day airborne landings, in their scattered reality, stand as a case study in friction. They show how a human system can accept risk as normal, and therefore discount warnings that describe that risk more precisely. They show how planning can become momentum. They show how an observer's numbers can be correct and still be set aside. The observer's bleak forecast was not a plea for drama. It was a statement of conditions: wind speed, direction, variability, cloud, and visibility. A set of facts that intersected with a schedule. On June 5th and June 6th, 1944, the schedule won. The drop went ahead. Men went into the air. They met the wrong winds. That does not mean the invasion should never have proceeded. It means the cost of proceeding included predictable dispersion and loss. It means the forecast had operational meaning, and not merely atmospheric interest. In the later months of 1944, airborne operations continue in Europe. Operation Market Garden in September is also shaped by weather and visibility, though in different ways. Operation Varsity in March 1945 occurs with more daylight and different planning, and still faces hazards. Airborne warfare remains hard to control. Weather remains one of the main reasons. The observer's story is therefore not only about one night. It is about the relationship between routine work and massive decisions. It is about how small reports become large consequences. It is about how an unsung role can be correct and still be unheard. In war histories, generals and commanders dominate the narrative. But war also runs on clerks, mechanics, operators, and observers. They are the ones who measure, fix, transmit, and record. Their work does not always stop the operation. Their work sometimes warns and sometimes documents why a plan broke. The weather observer's bleak forecast was dismissed. The airborne drop began in the wrong winds, and thousands of men fought through the results, scattered across a landscape they did not intend to land on. In the first hours of the liberation of Western Europe. If this kind of overlooked wartime role matters to you, subscribe for more WWW2 stories centered on the people whose work shaped operations from the background.